This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area. Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
We want to know more, do you? Informed Sources brings our region's top print and broadcast journalists together
to examine the stories behind the headlines.
And we can all learn more.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. With Carnival now past, we enter Lent, when even the Archdiocese has to face contrition. We will examine the condition of the church during its solemn season. Navigating bumpy roads is also a topic at New Orleans City Hall, where there is a controversial plan for hastening street repairs. Elsewhere, a public document, unlike any usually seen, was issued by the state this week. It is a protocol procedure for the first execution in 15 years. We will look at these stories, plus the latest in New Orleans' upcoming mayor's race, as well as the ill winds and bright sun of Mardi Gras. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Stephanie Riegel, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, Sophie Kasakove, also from the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, as well as John Zimmerman, also staff writer and also editor at the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Okay, guys, we're going to go first on over to Stephanie right now, because you've had a piece about the Archdiocese of New Orleans really sort of working toward getting smaller.
Right, and this is in the context, of course, of the bankruptcy case that we've talked about many times on this show, coming up now on its 5-year anniversary. May 1st, which is really kind of amazing when you think about it. And the two sides, there is reason to believe, are making progress, narrowing the gap between the two settlement amounts that they've been negotiating over for about the past 6 months now. They were several $100 million apart, but they have been making progress. 3 mediators on the case now. And so within the context of that, we just sort of did a piece that looked at how whatever emerges from this bankruptcy, assuming that it does emerge from bankruptcy court, will be a much smaller church than the one that went into it several years ago. And already we've had like 10% of the parishes close. 2 years ago, that happened, a little less than 2 years ago. The church is in the process of selling off a lot of its real estate. It's over $15 million so far, office buildings, community centers, former churches. And then more recently, there's been talk of the church sort of divesting itself or moving away from some of the nonprofit organizations that it has controlled and operated for decades as part of its ministry. A couple of years ago, it sold the nursing home and elderly care business to ComCare on the North Shore because of a recent flap with the leadership of Second Harvest Food Bank, which was founded in the 1980s by Archbishop Philip Hannon. Current Archbishop Gregory Amen has suggested he might divest himself as the sole corporate member of that nonprofit. And he said in a letter, unprompted, that he also might be looking to get away from running Christopher Homes, which is a very important charitable organization that provides housing to low-income seniors at about 20 different facilities around the New Orleans area. So, I mean, this is in part, due to shifting demographics, particularly when you look at the parish closures. We had a large wave of that after Katrina when we lost a lot of the population. You have neighborhoods now that are thriving, other neighborhoods that 100 years ago had a church on every corner and they don't have people there anymore. So, and there's declining mass attendance in some places, not in others. So part of this is normal, but it's also going on around the country. But because of the need to settle this case with something like 550 claimants alleging abuse against 300 and something priests and deacons and brothers and a handful of nuns, you have this huge financial liability, and they have to come up with money to settle it, and selling off assets is going to be a part of that. Not all of it, but a part of it.
No, they have been selling off assets, But is there a limit as to how much they can sell because of bond obligation?
Well, there is a limit, they have said, of $20 million, which is really not very much money when you think about the fact that they have to raise, say, 100, 200, 300, 400 million, who knows really, right? They have a bond covenant dating back to 2017. They basically refinanced some debt under Archbishop Aymon that they had, and part of their agreement with the bondholders is that they won't sell any more than $20 million of church-owned real estate. So there is that, and they have used that as an excuse of why we can't sell off anymore. Theoretically, they could renegotiate that bond covenant, although in court the bondholders have said they don't want to. I don't know. That's what people hire lawyers for. There's also real estate owned by the church affiliates that is not part of the bankruptcy. So some of those could be sold off, maybe. I mean, the thing that's confusing about the church, and we've talked about this before, is you really see where like canon law and civil law sort of bump heads, and that's what sort of happened with this Second Harvest flap. The Archbishop is the sole corporate member of these entities, right? But that's under canon law, and it doesn't really work under state and civil code. So it's hard to separate it all out.
So there's still some action that we could be seeing from the Catholic Church in the near future, from the Archdiocese, in terms of divesting and then also closing and consolidating, didn't it?
So in October, November 23, they closed or consolidated 11 parishes, folded them into 5 new ones. At the time, Aymon said that they would be closing and consolidating additional parishes. So far, that hasn't happened. I think because there have been so many other dumpster fires around this bankruptcy, and because they've had so many other issues to deal with and controversies. It's very controversial. I think they've put that on hold for now. But I think it's inevitable down the line. I mean, the other thing they're grappling with is they're in Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is a reorganization. They're not in Chapter 7, so they're not going to liquidate everything. They're trying to remain a going concern and be as viable and healthy as they can. So they're not going to try to sell and close the most lucrative parishes in the biggest, most populous, wealthiest neighborhoods, right? They're going to go to try to sell or get rid of older stuff in disinvested neighborhoods, and there's not as much of a market to buy those kind of properties, even if on paper they have a really large insured replacement value.
Right.
And that's part of the challenge they also face. People see their insured replacement value of all their assets on paper, say, well, they've got billions in real estate. Well, in one respect, yes, but in real life, if you put all those properties for sale, you wouldn't get $2 billion for them.
Okay, we'll be looking for what will happen down the line. Thanks a lot, Stephanie. Okay, Sophie, let's go on over to you because the city's trying to get streets repaired.
Right. So this is a project that has been going on for about a decade now, or that's when the city first got this huge pot of money from FEMA. It was related to settlements from Hurricane Katrina to repair hundreds of streets across the city. It was a $1.7 billion sum that they got from FEMA to do this work, and it's just been a continuous process of trying to get this huge project done. The city has struggled, for years to figure out how to organize this, figure out how to get it done. Of course, residents across the city know that the city has been facing challenges with this. And the latest here is that the city has announced this new plan to sort of get the final projects in its queue contracted out with construction firms. They have this sort of reorganization plan that they're working on with a consulting firm that they've brought on to manage the sort of remainder of the work.
So they've brought on an outside consulting firm then, just to sort of organize it and manage all of these projects?
Exactly, yeah. It's called CDM Smith. They're based in Boston, and they have come on within the last several months as the sort of overseer of the whole remainder of the work.
And so the approach, how are they going to take this? This is going to be to try to tackle a lot of sections at one time, or to just sort of zero in on one area?
Yeah, so the biggest change, I think, in the approach is that the city has been bidding out individual projects one at a time with different construction firms, and now there's a sort of effort to group projects. So, for example, the first group that's out for bid right now sort of groups a number of different projects together in the 7th Ward, Fairgrounds area, some other neighborhoods around there. So the city is saying that this is going to really help make the bidding process more efficient and get the work done more quickly. But there definitely remain a lot more questions about how long this will all take to actually get done. The city is saying that they're going to bid out the remainder of the projects by May, which is very soon, sort of in the scheme of all of this. But that's definitely a real question still about when the actual construction will be done. And there's a bunch of projects not included in that list that it remains unclear whether the city will have funding to actually complete them at all.
Yeah, are they going to have the funding? I mean, things are so much more expensive now.
Right. So the city, through this bringing on this consulting firm, got a sort of analysis done showing the gap in funding that they have between the amount that it would cost, that they were expecting these things would cost, back in 2015 when they got the money, and how much the project costs have increased due to inflation, everything else. So the gap there is $800 million or even $1 billion.
Oh, that's a big gap.
So there's 65 projects they're saying right now that are sort of on pause, pending additional funding.
And the money that we got from FEMA, 10 years ago, is there a deadline as to when it has to be spent?
The city has gotten a number of extensions over the years on this. Right now they just got awarded a new extension, so November is the new deadline. But in the past, Joe Threat, who's the Public Works Director for the city, has said that he was hoping to get an extension more towards 2027, 2028. So it's unclear at this point whether they've actually made that request or whether FEMA will grant that.
But we should see street repair happening pretty quickly now on a pretty big basis?
I mean, it's been happening. I don't necessarily know whether this change means that residents will actually see more or less, or like what that will look like in a given neighborhood. But residents know that
streets need to be repaired.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, thanks a lot, Sophie.
Thanks.
Okay, still talking about the city of New Orleans and politics. Who's going to run for mayor?
And let me warn people, we'll be talking about the mayor's race between now and October now, because that's October 11th, so it's going to probably always be a topic. This was supposed to have been an important week. The front runner so far, I think everybody agrees, is Helena Moreno, who's a council member at large. She seems to have a good campaign, a lot of support, a lot of money. The number one contender seems to have been, or still may be, Oliver Thomas, who's a district councilman. He really knows the council seats well. He's, at one point in his career, he was councilman from District B, which would be the central city part. Now he's councilman from District E, which would be the east. And at one time he was council member at large, and was perceived at one time as being the next mayor. Then he ran into some legal problems. But he's said that he was considering, and he said he was going to make an announcement after Mardi Gras. Well, today is after Mardi Gras, and so we're kind of expecting that maybe this week there'd be an announcement. What he does, I think, would be very decisive in this campaign. It kind of reminds me of during the governor's race when Billy Nungesser announced that he wasn't going to run for governor. To me, once he announced that, then that kind of changed the dynamics. That was a signal to a lot of Republicans to go behind Jeff Landry, and I think Landry's campaign started picking up steam. And I think if Tom decides he's not going to run, this is going to be a real momentum getter, not that you didn't have it already, for Moreno. The other candidates so far are Arthur Hunter, who's a criminal court judge, and Tyrell Morris, who's the former director of the communications district. Morris has a string of accusations that he's facing of legal problems, we announced. And you interviewed him yesterday, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I mean, I think, as you said, he definitely is going to have an uphill battle here. I asked him, about funding for his campaign. He said, we're getting started today. We just opened a bank account. So it's definitely, compared with what Moreno has sort of amassed in terms of support, it's definitely...
And when he asked how much money he has, he said zero, I believe. He said, I guess it was going to be the first day of opening his account. So at this point, it's fair to say, it doesn't seem like a contender. And so at this point, it seems like Helena Moreno certainly is a front runner. But we're still waiting to hear what Oliver Thomas does, and that's going to be a factor.
All right, and away we go with the mayor's race. Okay, thanks a lot, Dean. John, let's go on over to you and talking about something that really isn't too pleasant to talk about at all, but it is really very important. It is the death penalty here in the state of Louisiana, and an approaching execution, the first one in 15 years.
Yeah, Jesse Hoffman, a 46-year-old man who was from New Orleans and convicted of a crime. He committed murder when he was 18 years old. is scheduled to be executed March 18th. He's the first in 15 years, the first ever in Louisiana, scheduled to be killed by nitrogen gas, which he was in court Friday morning testifying in front of a federal judge in the Middle District of Louisiana in Baton Rouge. Shelley Dick, who is weighing a injunction request by Hoffman's attorneys. They're arguing that cruel and unusual punishment is what nitrogen gas would be, at least in Hoffman's case. They say he suffers from PTSD. They say that his Buddhist practices require breathing, and that the execution would impede that and constitute cruel and unusual punishment. As part of that case, on Thursday, they released the protocol that was unsealed for executing via nitrogen gas. This is the protocol that Jeff Landry has said a few weeks ago is ready, and that prompted DAs in various parishes to file execution warrants, one of which, Mr. Hoffman, remains. So he's there, and they're fighting this out in court. And the execution protocol is not light reading. It's not great bedtime reading. It's the nuts and bolts, really, of how the state intends to kill him and anyone else. And it's very closely aligned with Alabama's. Alabama is the only state in the country so far to have, in this modern era, killed via this method. They've done it 4 times. It's passed muster in the federal courts there. It's a different circuit. So what we'll expect is that Shelley Dick in the Middle District is going to issue a ruling probably early next week on the injunction request. So one way or the other, we'll head up probably to the Fifth Circuit, Court of Appeals, different circuit, and we'll see what happens.
There had been someone else who was on death row too, but he died.
Correct. Christopher Sepulvado of DeSoto Parish was the oldest prisoner on death row at 81 years old. He was the other person that they secured a death warrant for, but he died at Angola a few weeks ago or a week ago, and that left Hoffman as the only one possibly who is even eligible at this point to be executed. Liz Morrell, the Attorney General, talks about a few other names, but the advocates say that those people have not been through their full course of appeals.
So this nitrogen gas, it is a new approach for Louisiana, just made legal, last year?
Correct.
And so,
along with electrocution was brought back.
Okay. And so the other methods that have been used by the state was lethal injection. Why is that not being employed?
That's been on hold since 2010, the last time it was used, and that was a volunteer, Gerald Bordelon. It has been tied up in legal actions and the unavailability of the drugs amid all of the scrutiny around lethal injection drugs use. And so, one of the reasons the law was passed last year, or the reason, is because Governor Landry and others wanted to restart the execution chamber, and it's been a struggle to get those drugs.
Now, you said that Alabama did use this method.
4 times.
4 times.
In the last couple of years.
Has it been used elsewhere in the country? Or
it has
just
not.
It is
has
not. So this is really a new procedure then.
It's new. Alabama, again, there are some experts, the same expert that sort of, in a way, validated what happened in Alabama to the courts, or at least sort of assured the courts that there wasn't a lot of pain and suffering involved, is also the expert being used in this case for Louisiana. He's a California anesthesiologist who has done this on a number of occasions, on 10 or 15 occasions, supported efforts to execute.
So, the judge will take this other advisement, and you said perhaps we'll find out next week?
We should find out early next week, what Judge Dick decides in terms of this injunction and staying the execution, and that's a decision that will go to the appeals court. In Alabama, the district judge said was okay with the execution, and and so it went to the appeals court, and it's a sort of, did the judge abuse their discretion case. That 11th Circuit found that judge did not abuse their discretion. What Judge Dick will decide may put it in a different posture before the 5th Circuit, so we'll see what happens. The U.S. Supreme Court also declined to hear the Alabama case.
Okay, well, we'll see where that goes. And then this document about the protocol, there was some controversy about getting that released, too.
Sure thing. Yeah, the state didn't want to release it. And the advocates for Mr. Hoffman did. They want the public to see what's in here. There were some public safety concerns that the state raised. Judge Dick ordered them to get together and come up with a redacted version that would be released, and they both agreed to do that yesterday, Thursday.
Okay, and so the public can access this to
They
read
can
if
access
they so
this.
wish?
It's, I believe we have posted it
Okay.
in my stories, but yes, it is
Okay.
available.
All right, John, thanks. All right, Stephanie, it's going back over to you because some talk about adding some new life to West End in New Orleans.
Yeah, it's a sort of a classic land use dispute, among neighbors. Everybody of a certain age remembers West End Park and the wonderful restaurants out there that were out over the water on piers, Brunings, Fitzgerald's, some nightclubs, Augie's del Lago. They were ruined in Katrina, and ever since then, that park, that land has just basically sat vacant. It's been used for storage. It's been used to house construction materials as they've rebuilt the municipal yacht harbor and the canal, the 17th Street Canal. Anyway, it took several years and lots of legal maneuvers to clear the way for the property to be redeveloped, which has been the aim of the City of New Orleans, which owns most of it through a separate building corporation for years. And now, after some state and city legislation that passed last year, they're ready to move forward. They've hired a consultant. They've been looking at possible uses for it. There are a couple of problems, though, and for one of them is that some of the neighbors in the boathouses, which are the nearest neighbors to West End Park, are very much against it. And the boathouses in the years since Katrina have really come up. They're very much more expensive. People have added on to them. They've built up, and so it's not kind of the quiet. It's still the quiet little neighborhood that it was, but there's a lot more investment in those boathouses than there used to be. And there are also some environmental groups that are opposed to any sort of commercial activity going on there. Recently, Jefferson Parish and Orleans Parish had back-to-back neighborhood meetings to talk about some of the findings of the consultant's report, which said basically that there's a market for it and there's a need and possible demand for some small-scale commercial out there, some nice quiet restaurants, something like that. But the neighbors and the people who are opposed to it said there's no such thing. They deal with noise from nightclubs across the canal that they can hear. They're worried about traffic. And the other thing is, when West End Park, before Katrina, the restaurants were out over the water. And so the parking took place really in what will now be the commercial area, which means parking would be on the street near the boathouses. So there's just concerns about that kind of stuff. And so it's a very contentious issue. But the city's been working on this for years. As much as they might like to have more green space or a bird sanctuary, that doesn't generate revenue to pay for maintenance of this park. And they have assured the neighbors that they're not going to put wild nightclubs or, loud music there, that there would be limits as to what could go there.
One of the most beautiful jazz songs ever recorded was by Louis Armstrong called West End Blues. It's a wonderful song. People should listen to it. Only problem, there hasn't been a West End,
right?
Or at least a West End as we knew it. So if we had something that can match the song, that would really be something.
I know, and I mean it's a great area.
Oh, it is a great area, yeah. But
and I think there's room for compromise. But the opponents are very, very vocal, and they've been making a lot of noise.
Okay, we'll see where it goes, Steph. Okay, E, we're going to wrap up with you with Carnival. We had a good one.
Yeah, it was good. Almost. I mean, except for the weather at the very end. Of all the days, Mardi Gras afternoon. I mean, like the last hours of Carnival is when it got bad because of the weather. And in that previous weekend, you did have a rainy day. I will say this: there have been times when parades have been canceled before throughout the history of Carnival. I don't remember it being called because of the wind, rain, cold weather. There was a famous parade in 1899 where produce was paraded, and the weather was like in the single digits.
Oh my goodness!
And they had to push it back from Monday to Friday, so it had to march in Lent, which was scandalous. The police strikes, the COVID strikes, but I've never recalled the wind being an issue. But I happened to be crossing Canal Street, I guess around noon, Mardi Gras, and it just starting to kick up. It's just blowing dirt with like pellets. I mean, it was really, it's really a forceful wind. So I think they did the right thing by postponing it. Besides that, it looks good. Some encouraging things I saw One is that there was a system to deal with it, because whenever you've had issues about canceling parades, there were times if you lose your parade, you're out of there. There's no more. Now they're getting a little bit more softer about that and rescheduling it on the weekend after. So, which means a lot to the crew, because they make money by having riders come on, and it's a big loss. So I think there's more sensitivity to that. I think most of the parades, at least the ones I saw, look better now. I think maybe it's the technology. It used to be to have 2 or 3 really nice parades, and then some they just had secondhand floats. But you look at things, I mean, Rex is always really nice, but you look at Orpheus and Proteus and Babylon and several parades that were really nice. And there's more sensitivity about throws, especially more environmental friendly. It's not all these plastic beads. I mean, like Rex was throwing bags of coffee, and they had these other things that are biodegradable, and Muses throw things. I got one time a Muses luggage tag, which actually used on a trip. And so I think there's more sensitivity about that. And I just think by now we're learning to do it better and safer at this point.
Certainly safety was the issue.
If only we could block the wind.
Yeah, okay, and then of course they will be rolling in New Orleans, the truck parade Sunday, and then Jefferson Parish also had canceled theirs, so that's what, for after St. Patrick's Day parade going to Metairie.
St. Patrick's Day always chases Mardi Gras. This time they're going to merge together.
That's right.
Okay,
they're going down Metairie Road too, which should will be interesting. Okay, we got to wrap up. Other stories, E.
Wow, I forgot. Come back to me.
Okay. Stephanie.
The Upper Pentalba, some of the oldest apartment buildings in the country, and certainly some of the most historic buildings in New Orleans, are set to be renovated after years of planning and negotiating to get money out of the city. And that's a great thing, because they have a lot of problems and years' worth of deferred maintenance. However, the tenants are going to have to move out for up to 2 years, and that's creating some controversy.
I'm sure so.
Read about that this weekend.
Okay, we will. Sophie, over to you.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, the homeless shelter, temporary homeless shelter that Governor Landry set up on the edge of the city before the Super Bowl. It's coming into its potentially final days. Next week could be the end, but still unclear. So, we're going to be following that next week.
Very good. John, real quick.
A federal judge recently put the NOPD in their sustainment period at the end of the reform, the long-standing consent decree for 12 years. But that's not good enough with the city. They want to appeal it. They've appealed it to the Fifth Circuit, and they still want to just get out now. So stay tuned to see how that plays out.
All right.
Okay, the Gulf Breeze, the train that's supposed to be connecting Mobile with New Orleans, scheduled for June. Originally it's going to be January, supposed to be 2 times a day. They say the route's going to be beautiful on the Gulf Coast. A problem that might be lurking is Elon Musk is on record as not liking Amtrak. He's saying it should be privatized, and so that might be an issue for the future. But for the immediacy, it's starting in June.
Okay, great. All right, guys, thanks a lot. Thank you all for joining us. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
From Masterpiece to Nova, Antiques Roadshow to Agatha Christie.
And of course, stepping out and Informed Sources.
We are pleased to support public television.
It's been our passion.
For a lifetime.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation, proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.